This is the Beginners Self-Publishing Salon podcast with me, Artale, and my co-host, Michael Ronn. Hello, Michael.
Hey, Jay. Can't believe it's November already.
I know, this year has flown by, that's for sure. So in September, we covered ebook design and how to work with a designer. And obviously, as a new author, sometimes you've got a limited budget.
There are probably some people who are listening to this and thinking, well, that's great and all, but I still can't afford to hire a pro. How am I going to design my own cover?
And maybe it's your first book and you don't even know whether this, being an author is what you want to do. So you don't want to make too much of a monetary commitment up front, which is what I did when I did my first book. I was an author by accident. I created my first guidebook, and it wasn't until I'd written my first one then I realized, oh, I want to do this again. And, I didn't spend any money with my cover design. I chose an awful font. I chose one of my photographs. I looked at Lonely Planet travel guidebooks, and they have really simple covers, which is a photograph and the title. They don't even have an author name on the front. So I kind of went with a Lonely Planet look, and it works for Lonely Planet. It doesn't work for J. Artale. But I thought it looked fabulous, and like I say, it's sold. But there's lots of options if you want to design your own cover. There's so much information out there. We live in the information age. There's lots and lots and lots of resources out there that you can do, and lots of different tools that you can use. What are some that you'd recommend for people designing their own covers?
Yeah, and I'll preface this with our recommendation always is, if you can do it, hire someone. But if you cannot and you have to walk down this path, be sure to do it, but just do it with your eyes open. Just understand that there are some downsides to doing this, but some tools that you can certainly use. First and foremost would be Photoshop and or InDesign to design your own tools. And if you've never had experience with either of those, they have quite a learning curve. There are tutorials and websites and YouTube videos and all kinds of things that you can use to get a handle on them. But if you're not going to invest the money into a designer, you are going to have to invest the time and the money into learning the tools. If Photoshop is outside of your realm, there's also GIMP, which is a free version, and it's very similar to Photoshop, and it does most of the things that Photoshop does. It's available on Windows and Macintosh. I think it might be available on Linux as well. And that's a good tool that you can use. And then there's also Canva, which is a free web-based design tool that a lot of people have been using to design a lot of things, but you can also use that to design book covers.
Yeah, they have ebook cover templates, so it's a good start there. And they have some free images that you can use, and then there's images that you can license from them. And I think that's a key thing, that if you're designing your own cover, that you have the rights to use the image that you're including on your cover so that you don't get in trouble. And there's lots of services out there that you can license images from.
Yep, Shutterstock, CanStock, Deposit Photo. Yeah, you can just Google search and you'll be able to find plenty of places where you can find source material.
So they have images, and one of the things you need to do is making sure that it is licensed to use for an ebook cover, because there's lots of different licenses associated with images, and whether you're going to put it on a product that you're going to sell versus just promotional use. So that's a key thing to look at when you're trying to source image, that you have the rights to license it and use it on an ebook cover.
Right. And when in doubt, ask for the permission. This is not one of those situations where you want to be slapped on the hand for forgiveness. Forgiveness in this sense is a lawsuit and all kinds of other painful things that you don't want to have to deal
Especially
with.
So, if it's a Getty image.
Exactly. Yeah, Getty Image or anyone. Yeah, you just want to be careful when you're getting those source materials, because sometimes there are some unscrupulous people out there that will say that they own the rights to an image, and in fact, they really don't own it. And at the end of the day, if something happens, it's still your responsibility. So that's why using a reputable site like Shutterstock or Deposit Photo, CanStock, those are going to be good places, because while you may pay a little bit more for the source image, you can be relatively assured that the person there has the copyright to the image that you're buying. So I have a couple other resources that I'd like to give people. Cover Design Secrets, that's an ebook by Derek Murphy. He's a great cover designer and an indie author. That's a great little book that covers the basic design premises behind ebook cover design. And it also talks about the different typographies that I was mentioning earlier for different genres. So that's a great book to pick up if you have not read that. The Book Cover Designer Awards, that's Joel Friedlander. I think probably people on the show have heard of him. He's also a great cover designer. He runs a great website that provides a lot of different resources on self-publishing, but more specifically on cover design. I don't know if he still does this, but it's still in the archives. It's the awards. So he does a monthly contest where authors can submit their covers, and he critiques them and gives a gold star to the ones that are the best submissions for the month. And it's a great opportunity to look at a seasoned designer looking at covers and critiquing them and talking about what works, talking about what doesn't. And that's a great thing for you to do for research.
Yeah, I liked going on there to look at not so much what covers work, but what didn't work, because it's quite often it's just a sentence and he picks out the most important thing of, you know, what doesn't work. So that's really useful when you're trying to design your own covers, understanding not only what works, but what doesn't work. Yeah, it's a really great resource. And
he doesn't mince words either. That's the best part too. I mean, he's very candid and honest about what works for him and what doesn't.
And then if you're going to dive into Photoshop, there's lots of tutorial sites. There's a big learning curve with Photoshop. If you're going to make that investment and you want to do covers and you've got license to use Photoshop, then there's sites like lynda.com and Udemy that have courses that you can subscribe to and pay for doing basics of cover design. So I haven't done any cover design courses on Udemy, but I've done some other courses, and I really like their format, because there's usually really short videos covering specific topics, and it'll work you through the whole process.
And it's very affordable. And they run sales all the time. You can get a good price for a lot of these tutorials. And if that doesn't work for you, or if you can't find anything there, good old YouTube. There are hours and hours of video instructions on Photoshop and composition and color theory and all those sorts of things about cover designs that you can find on YouTube. You will have to do a little bit of work to find them, and you will have to filter through some of the stuff that may not be relevant to you, but that is also a good place that you can start. And then the last resource that I would offer up to people is your local library. So when I was starting off as an author, I went and rented out a lot of color design books, a lot of art books and pattern design books and things like that, just to look through them and get inspired. That's something that you can do as well to help keep you fresh and find out what kind of design schools and design theories there are that can be helpful to you as well.
Yeah, there are lots of websites out there, and I like the websites that show you complementary colors. So if you're fixated on a specific color, or you're using a background image with a specific color, looking at using these color wheel sites that shows you the complementary colors that would work well with that cover, and make sure that, you know, going back to that first comment we made at the beginning of the show, which is what does your cover look like on a thumbnail? Making so many covers that I see, once they're small, you can't really make out the title, and you definitely can't make out the author name because it's so small. So, you know, if they're a key part of your cover design, and the title surely is, then it needs to stand out when it's at that thumbnail size. But there are lots of resources available, and there's so many different elements, which if you look at the amount of time you're going to spend researching all of those core elements, what to bring to your book and everything, balance out with what you're going to pay a cover designer, at the end of the day, you know, you've got to look at what's the value of your time. And, you know, if you
time, I always say time is more expensive and valuable than money. There are some video resources on the self-publishing site by Paul Teague, right?
On our homepage, our book design advice homepage, Paul's done a series of really short videos on, you know, working with a designer, if you're going to do it yourself, if you're going to use a template service. So he goes through each one, and each video covers basically all the same things that we talked about today. And it really breaks the process down into the decisions that you've got to make, and looks at the process and how complex it is. And we hasn't mentioned price, but it does grade them on, you know, cheap versus medium versus more expensive.
Yeah, that's a great resource for people to look at, especially if you have some time and you're going to want to do your own covers. You'll definitely, whether you do or not, you still want to look at it and find out what you can glean from it.
Yes. So any other pearls of wisdom based on your cover design experience that you want to bring to the table before we wrap up today's show?
I would just say that it's a journey. Don't expect that your very first covers, whether you hire them or do them yourself, that they'll necessarily be amazing, because you learn more about book covers as you go. I feel like I know a lot more than I knew back in 2014 when I first started. And so just like your author career is a journey, your knowledge of covers and what constitutes a good cover is a journey. And also remember that cover tastes change. So what's hot in urban fantasy covers now is not necessarily going to be hot in urban fantasy covers 5 years from now. So just know that you always have to stay on top of what's current in your genre, and that you have to be prepared to pivot when you need to.
So you're starting to write in a new genre now, aren't you?
Yeah.
So how are you approaching that with your cover design? Have you even thought about cover design yet?
Oh yeah. I've actually already hired the designer, and I should have those covers next month. But yeah, I did a lot of the research topics and tips that we talked about in this show. So going to Pinterest, looking at the top books on Amazon. Yeah, just looking at all that.
How do you handle that for a newish niche? Is there still books out there in that niche?
There aren't as many. And so that's why, like I said before, you have to figure out what that one thing is. So if this is a book about a video game, what is it that's you're going to put on the cover that makes it look like a video game? And so that's kind of been my guiding thing. If you can distill that down to one or two elements, that's going to serve you well, especially when you have a genre like lit RPG, where there really aren't that many. I mean, there are, but there's no established standard yet. And so you kind of have to look at all of them, figure out what's that one thing that they all have in common at a very high level, and then go from there. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's fun.
It's a bit like designing a poetry book cover.
Yeah, pretty much. It's exactly the same. Exactly the same, except with poetry, you really don't have a one guiding principle that you can put on the cover, because it's also different.
You've got poetry books out there, haven't you?
I do. I have 3 poetry collections. And what I decided to do was just come up with a design, and maybe I can put the covers on there on the show notes as well, to have just a core design that I can put on all of my different covers. So I basically do like 4 illustrated images. So like for my beach poem collection, I have a beach ball, I've got 2 guys with sunglasses, I've got a surfboard, and then a palm tree. That's just on the cover. But then on my next collection, which is like my Android collection, I've got 4 Android parts. And so it's like 4 corners. And so if you look at them all, it's all got consistent branding, consistent color schemes. My author name looks the same. And so I just made a decision that that's what I want my poetry collections to look like moving forward. Yeah, I mean, there's no wrong or right answer. I guess you just know if the book is selling or not, right?
Yeah, whether it's selling, and you're saying that the market's taste change, but I think you as an author, your taste change as well, don't they? As you understand more about it, and you realize that, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I've got a cover out there that looks like that. I need to change it. I did my first print book the other month, and you've really got to start looking at things differently when you're doing print. So we're going to do a show about print book covers somewhere down the line, because obviously you've got a back cover that you have to do, and there's more elements to look at. So I think that deserves a show by itself. But as far as ebook covers, looking at what your role is as an author, knowing what works, what doesn't work, understanding your genre, and being able to envisage what your image is going to look like in a small thumbnail, I think are some of the key elements, that as long as you've always got those in the back of your mind, whether you're working with a designer or doing things yourself, those are the key things that you've got to carry forward.
Definitely. So what are you going to be working on for next month?
I've got my 4-book series of how to write a travel guide, and the first book in the series is the planning process behind writing a travel guide. So I've actually put it on Amazon for pre-sale to motivate me to finish it. So these books, this 4 series, have been languishing for about a year and a half now, and I really just need to get the first one out there. So on our self-publishing advice blog, if you go to our book design advice homepage, you will find a series of videos by Paul Teague. So they're short videos, and they cover the same topics that we've covered today, but just from a different slant. So that's a great resource. And also that homepage is a good resource for articles about working with a cover designer. There's a blog post about 5 tips for designing your own cover. So there's a wealth of information. So even though we do recommend that you have a designer design your ebook cover, lots of information on the website about designing your own ebook cover. So that's it for this month's show. You can drop us a comment on the show summary page at www.selfpublishingadvice.org. So as always, if you've enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to leave a review on your podcast network of choice, as this really helps us find more great listeners like you. And it also helps the other shows on our network. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next month. Happy writing.